The night before my wedding, I opened the wrong hotel room door and found my fiancé in bed with my Aunt Celeste, but what I uncovered after that was darker than betrayal. And yes, I still married him. You'll understand why by the end. They say some women are cursed to be too trusting. I used to laugh at that idea until I became the punchline of it. After 10 long, quiet years of widowhood in my sea-washed cottage in coastal Maine, I had finally stopped expecting love to knock again. My days were filled with the rustle of pages and the cry of gulls, the only warmth being the memory of the man I buried and the kettle I boiled for one. That was until Dean Maddox appeared one breezy Thursday afternoon at our book club. He stood near the snack table quoting Rilke like someone carved from a different time, gentle, silver-haired, a little weathered, and far too poetic for someone shopping at the same local grocer as me. His first words were about grief, and I should have known then, no man speaks so sweetly of pain unless he's learned to make it a tool. But I was lonely. I let the sound of his voice coat the ache in my ribs. Dean was a widower. His wife had passed from cancer. He loved poetry, old jazz, and the sea. He listened when I spoke. Brought me used books tied with twine. Called me his second spring. And slowly, carefully, I began to believe in the impossible again. We dated for nearly a year before he proposed, on the same bluff behind my house where I used to watch the sunsets alone. He slid a ring onto my finger hidden inside Jane Eyre, and when I said yes, I swore I could hear my heart learning how to beat differently. He moved in, and we planned a small wedding, just family, just love, just us. I told Aunt Celeste first, my glamorous, unpredictable aunt who had been more of a sister to me all my life. She squealed, poured champagne, and promised to help plan everything. She said, "You deserve this, Nat, don't second guess it." I didn't. Not until the night before the wedding, when I walked into the wrong hotel room and saw him, my Dean, naked in bed, tangled in the legs of the woman I'd trusted more than my own mother. But what hurt worse than that image? What came after? Because this wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a plot. And my aunt, my blood, wasn't new to the game of taking what was mine. Not even close. But I'll tell you everything. Because I still married Dean. Yes, I did. And you'll understand why I walked down that aisle with a smile so sweet it could kill. If you've ever had someone rip your heart out with a smile, like this story, share it with someone who's been through the same, and subscribe my channel. Also, tell me, where are you from? I want to know who's hearing my voice tonight. It was supposed to be a quiet night. I'd chosen the seaside inn because of its view, the way the ocean hummed right outside the windows and the wildflowers swayed like wedding guests practicing their bows. Most of the family had already checked in, including Aunt Celeste, who was given the room just across from mine. We'd shared champagne earlier that evening, toasted on the balcony under a veil of stars, and she'd kissed my forehead like she used to when I was a child pretending to be asleep in her lap. I had told her I was nervous. She said, "Don't be. Dean adores you. I've never seen him look at anyone like that." Then she squeezed my hand. "You're going to be the happiest bride this coast has ever seen." Strange, how betrayal feels so much sharper when it comes with a kiss and a promise. I hadn't meant to walk in on them. I went down the hall looking for ice. I remember humming some tune from childhood, something my father used to whistle. The hallway was dim, lantern lights low and flickering, and the room numbers all blurred slightly in the quiet haze of my joy and nervousness. My room was 203. Or was it 204? I held the little key card and knocked once before letting myself in, thinking maybe Dean had come to surprise me. Maybe he wanted one final smile before the big day. I wish he had. I wish that's what I saw when I opened the door. Instead, I saw skin. Writhing sheets. A moan that didn't belong to me. Dean's back, naked and arching, his voice gasping my aunt's name like a prayer. And Celeste, her hair spilled over the pillows, her legs draped over him, her lipstick smudged and her eyes wide when she saw me. For one cruel second, she didn't flinch. She just stared. And then she had the audacity to smile. Natalie, she said softly, her voice like perfume turned bitter, you weren't supposed to see this. The room spun, and my hands turned to ice. The bucket I was carrying hit the floor with a clang, spilling cold cubes across the carpet like shattered bones. Dean turned, panic flashing across his face, and stammered something, "It's not what it looks like," as if there were a version of that image that could look like love. My legs moved before my mind did. I walked out without a word, the hallway stretching like a tunnel, and somehow I made it back to my room without collapsing. I locked the door. Sat on the edge of the bed. And then, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened. To the sound of the ocean outside my window, crashing and crashing and crashing, like it had known all along what I didn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the sky turn from black to gray to gold, and I thought about everything. Not just Dean. Not just Celeste. But my late husband. My years alone. My silence. My blind spots. There were patterns forming now, and I was starting to see the whole damn quilt. When the sun rose, I got up, made tea, and made a plan. Because tomorrow, I would walk down that aisle. I would wear the dress. I would say the vows. But not for the reasons anyone thought. No, I was going to play the fool one last time, because fools, when they get quiet enough, become the most dangerous kind of woman. The morning after betrayal doesn't look like you expect. There's no dramatic storm, no mirror-breaking scream. Just sunlight, bright and shameless, pouring into the hotel room like it knows what you saw and dares you to flinch. I sat in my robe, hands wrapped around a porcelain teacup, watching the ocean dance with indifference. Birds called. Waves licked the shore. The world went on as if it hadn't caught fire the night before. I, on the other hand, was made of cinders. But I wasn't ready to turn to ash. Not yet. That was the moment I decided to go through with the wedding, not because I wanted Dean, and certainly not because I forgave him, but because I needed the stage. A wedding is a spotlight, and betrayal is best exposed when the lights are brightest. I called Celeste first. "Breakfast?" I asked, my voice as smooth as her favorite satin. She arrived dressed like springtime, soft florals, dewy skin, not a trace of guilt in her eyes. If she was shaken from being caught, she didn't show it. That's the thing about women like her, they don't panic when the house burns, they just reach for the wine. We sat across from each other at the inn's sunlit bistro, sipping mimosas as if the world hadn't cracked open. "Rough night?" she asked with a smirk, slicing her grapefruit. I stared at her. She held my gaze like it was a dare. "I'm going through with it," I said. Her fork paused midair. "You're, what?" I leaned in. "I'm marrying him." She blinked. "Nat, don't pretend concern now," I whispered. "You made your move. You think I'm stupid? I know this wasn't an accident. I know this started before I came into the picture. But if you want to keep pretending, fine. Just remember I know how to pretend too." She was quiet after that. We finished our meal in silence, like two generals sharing a last meal before war. Dean came to my room hours later. Knocked twice. He looked tired, shirt wrinkled, eyes rimmed with panic, but still tried to smile. "Natalie, I messed up," he began. I tilted my head like a curious widow in mourning. "You think?" He stepped inside, reached for my hand, and I let him. Just for a moment. "It was a mistake," he said. "A drunken, stupid, stop," I said, my voice like frost. "Let me guess, you and Celeste were a one-time thing. You got confused. You panicked. It meant nothing." He nodded too quickly. I stepped closer. "That's funny. Because she told me it wasn't your first time." His face fell. That's when I knew I had him. I smiled, slow and small. "But you know what? I forgive you." His brows shot up, disoriented by the sudden mercy. "You do?" I kissed his cheek. "We all make mistakes, Dean. And what matters most is the future, right? He relaxed. Hugged me. Murmured thank yous like a man saved from drowning. And I smiled again. Because he had no idea, I was the tide, and he'd just stepped deeper into the water. That night, I wrote a new set of vows. Not the kind you read at the altar, but the kind you etch in your mind. I vowed to keep my voice soft and my spine steel. I vowed to play the part until the curtain fell. And I vowed that when they least expected it, when the music played, and the wine flowed, I would give them the kind of wedding no one would ever forget. The morning of the wedding began like a dream someone else was supposed to live. The sky was clear, the ocean calm, and the breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs from the hill behind the inn. I woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, and laid out the gown, ivory silk, long-sleeved, classic. The kind of dress that said grace when worn by the right woman. When I first chose it, I imagined Dean's face when he'd see me in it. I used to imagine his eyes softening, his breath catching. But now, I only hoped it would be the dress he'd remember in nightmares, the one I wore when I exposed him and burned down every lie he built. As I dressed, Celeste came in uninvited. Of course she did. You look stunning, she said, her voice honeyed with something that tried to pass for admiration. She touched the edge of my veil with her manicured fingers. Are you sure you want to go through with this? She asked. I turned to face her, calm as a lake hiding a whirlpool beneath. Are you worried about me? Or him? She shrugged, leaning against the wall like she hadn't made a habit of curling up with the man I was meant to marry. Dean said you forgave him. That you're starting fresh. I smiled. I am. We all need fresh starts, don't we, Celeste? Even women who crawl into beds they don't belong in. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, but she didn't flinch. That was her gift. The woman could walk through fire in heels and never smell of smoke. The ceremony was held on the bluff behind my cottage, overlooking the endless gray shimmer of the Atlantic. Friends and family gathered, all dressed in their best, whispering about how love finds us when we least expect it. Dean stood under the arbor, looking freshly pressed and groomed, the perfect aging groom. I walked down the aisle on my own, no father to give me away, no brother to hold my arm. Just me, and the cold resolve twisting like ivy through my chest. I saw the way Dean looked at me. Saw the flicker of something like guilt or hope flash across his face. He didn't know yet. He thought I'd swallowed the pain. That I was the kind of woman who would rather wear shame than tear the illusion apart. The vows were short. The ocean clapped behind us, and the wind lifted my veil like a breath. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Dean leaned in, his lips trembling against mine. I let it happen. Let the cameras flash. Let the lie take one final breath. Then I pulled back, smiled at the guests, and said, "Thank you all for coming. Please, stay for the reception. We have a few surprises in store." Celeste clapped the loudest. She thought she'd won. She always did. But I could feel the weight of my folder tucked inside the satin lining of my clutch. Bank statements. Emails. Photographs. This wasn't just about stolen kisses. No. It was about stolen money. Stolen years. A stolen life. But tonight, I'd steal back every last ounce of it. If anyone noticed the tremble in my hands as I clutched my bouquet, they chalked it up to nerves. A bride's nerves. A flutter of excitement. No one suspected that beneath the lace gloves and the ivory smile, I was threading a wire of vengeance tighter and tighter around two throats. The reception was held in a white tent on the lawn, lanterns glowing like stars hung just low enough to catch secrets. The tables were dressed in cream and gold, guests sipping champagne and offering toasts to love and second chances. I sat beside Dean, my new husband, while he beamed at everyone like he hadn't destroyed me less than 24 hours earlier. I watched him clink glasses with my cousin. I watched Celeste sashay from table to table, whispering into ears, hugging guests like she was the true bride of the evening. Perhaps in her twisted mind, she was. I didn't speak much. I let the chatter flow around me like a current I no longer needed to swim in. My eyes scanned the room, taking note of who might stand with me once the sky cracked open. Most wouldn't. Most people don't like being reminded how close betrayal sits to the head of every family table. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from the private investigator I'd hired weeks ago. The documents are in place. Ready when you are. I exhaled slowly. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down hard, but I welcomed it. It meant the timing was right. I had known something was off even before I found them together. Dean had suggested early in the engagement that we combine accounts, for simplicity, he'd said. It'll make it easier for planning, for taxes, he'd reasoned. I'd nodded, but I never signed anything. Instead, I made copies. I asked questions. I called in favors from old friends who worked in banking and estate law. And what they found chilled me. Dean had been slowly accessing portions of my trust fund through forged documents, with Celeste's help. Fake signatures. False authorizations. Joint business ventures that never existed. This wasn't love gone wrong, it was a long con. And I had fallen for it. Again. Just like I had with my late husband. But not this time. No, this time I would not just walk away. I would let them choke on the cake they helped me cut. As dessert was served, lemon raspberry torte with sugared violets, I stood. My glass in hand. My breath even. Dean smiled, expecting something soft, something sweet. A thank you speech, perhaps. Celeste adjusted her shawl and leaned forward. My voice rang clear through the tent. To love, they say, is to risk everything. And I did. I risked my heart, my future, my name. I believed in fairy tales. But what no one tells you is how quickly love can rot when it's built on lies. The murmurs started then, gentle, confused. I looked directly at Dean. Last night, I walked into room 204. I saw my new husband in bed with my aunt. And I wish that was the worst part. Gasps. A fork clattered. Celeste stiffened. But it wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was theft. My finances, my trust fund, were manipulated through carefully forged documents. What I thought was love was, in truth, a robbery in slow motion. I held up the folder, slowly opening it. These are the papers, bank records, emails, photos. And don't worry, they've already been submitted to my attorney and to the police. Dean stood, face white, words scrambling in his throat. Natalie, we can talk about this. No, Dean, I said, louder now. You had your time to talk. Now I'll talk. You were never in love with me. You were in love with my money. And you, Celeste, I turned to her, you were in love with destroying anything I ever loved. Silence. Shaking shoulders. And finally, shame. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because sometimes you don't just unmask a liar. You make sure the whole world sees their face. No one clapped after my speech. No one stood. No one laughed to break the tension like they do in movies. Real betrayal settles like fog, it crawls into throats, into eyes, into the awkward shifting of silverware. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the ocean just beyond the tent walls, and the brittle tinkle of someone dropping a spoon onto china. Dean's hands were shaking. Not with guilt, he had no room for that anymore. His fear came from exposure. Men like Dean, they only survive in the dark. I had ripped the curtains open, and he was squinting like a rat beneath sudden sun. Celeste, on the other hand, recovered quickly. She rose, tall and pale, every hair still in place. This is a misunderstanding, she said to the guests, lifting her arms like some kind of social priestess. Natalie is overwhelmed. She's always had a flair for the dramatic. Her voice was silk soaked in venom. I'd heard it for years, used against waiters, cousins, anyone who made her feel smaller than she wanted to be. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched. Darling, please, let's talk somewhere quiet. Don't call me darling, I said, my voice like salt across a wound. You lost the right to speak to me the moment you climbed into my bed's placeholder. Dean tried to move toward me too. We can fix this, he said. It was a mistake, just once. I was drunk. She came to me, enough, I said, lifting the folder higher. Don't embarrass yourself further. I have the emails, Dean. The transfer records. The time-stamped footage from the hotel hallway. I knew about the affair before I ever walked in that room. I was just waiting to see how far you'd fall. A few guests stood. My cousin Rachel came to my side, slipping her arm into mine. Her eyes, wide with rage, never left Celeste. I always had a feeling about her, she muttered. I just didn't want to be the one to say it. Dean collapsed into a chair like a man suddenly made of wet paper. Celeste stood frozen, until she snapped. You've always been jealous of me, Natalie, she spat. You lived in my shadow your whole life. I made things exciting, beautiful. You were always just the pale one with the books and the boring husband. That stung more than I let show, not because it wasn't true, but because she said it with such ease. Like it had lived on her tongue for years, waiting. You're right, I said softly. I was pale. I was quiet. But I'm not anymore. And you've mistaken cruelty for power your whole life. The guests had begun to leave. Quietly. Awkwardly. Some offered hugs. Others just looked away, embarrassed by the ugliness spilling into the air like ink in clean water. The violinist stopped playing. A glass shattered somewhere near the bar. And just like that, the entire fantasy collapsed. There would be no first dance. No cake cutting. No sunset kiss under the twinkle lights. Just the sound of waves and the hush of stunned disbelief. Celeste stormed out first, her heels stabbing the grass with each step. Dean sat slumped at the sweetheart table alone, mascara from Celeste's kiss still on his collar, the word husband already rusting. I watched them both go, not with triumph, but with the cool clarity of a woman who had, at last, pulled the knife out of her back and laid it gently at their feet. Keep it, I whispered to no one. You'll need it for each other. And then I turned. Walked barefoot across the grass. Back to my cottage. Back to myself. The music may have stopped, but the truth had finally begun to sing. When I reached my cottage, the silence was almost too soft to bear. It wrapped around me like the arms of someone I used to love. I stood in my wedding dress in the foyer, sea breeze trailing the hem, and listened to nothing. No footsteps behind me. No violin strings. No empty promises. Just the sound of my breath. I kicked off my heels. Walked to the mirror. Looked at the woman who had just burned her entire life down in front of 50 people, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, but because she looked awake. Fully, painfully awake. And I knew I'd never close my eyes again. I peeled the dress off slowly. Folded it like a memory and placed it in a box marked for donation. Let someone else wear it someday. Someone who still believed. In the shower, I scrubbed away the layers, powder, perfume, expectation. I watched mascara bleed into the drain like the final act of a silent film. Then I sat in my robe by the window with a cup of tea and opened the other file, the one my investigator had sent just days earlier. I hadn't had time to look through all of it before the wedding. Now I had all the time in the world. And what I found was worse than I imagined. Dean hadn't just started seeing Celeste after he met me. He had known her first. They had a relationship years ago, nothing official, nothing on paper, but enough to be dangerous. And not only that, they had already tried this once before. In another town. Another woman. Another inheritance. They'd run the same pattern, charming the vulnerable, the grieving, the aging. Then draining accounts behind smiles and rings and shared bank folders. That woman had taken her life 2 years ago. The death was ruled unrelated, but her sister had always suspected something darker. The detective found her blog. Hidden, quiet, private entries. One line struck like lightning: "I keep catching him whispering to my aunt in the hall when he thinks I'm asleep." My hand shook. I put the pages down. Walked outside. The wind was colder now. The ocean no longer looked poetic, it looked like a truth I should have read sooner. And that's when another memory rose, slow and awful: my late husband. The way he used to linger when Celeste visited. The way their laughter felt secretive. The long silences between us. The business trips. The way she held my hand at his funeral, too tight, too long. I remembered the letters I once found in his drawer, and signed, perfumed, filled with poetic flirtation I had convinced myself was fiction. I burned them back then. Refused to believe my own instincts. But now? Now the pattern was clear. Celeste had stolen from me long before Dean. She had been laying bricks around me for years, shaping a cage I'd called family. And I let her. Because I wanted to believe she loved me. That she saw me as more than her backup plan, her pale niece, her shadow. But she didn't. And now I had to decide, was this justice enough? Had I already won by exposing them? Or was there something more I needed to do, something that would ensure no other woman ended up standing barefoot in a ruined wedding gown by the sea? Because some betrayals don't just deserve punishment. They require a reckoning. After the reception fallout, I retreated to the sanctuary of my cottage like a woman shedding old skin. The ocean whispered secrets against the rocks below, and the salt air filled my lungs with bitter clarity. I spent the next days combing through every scrap of evidence the private investigator had uncovered: the hidden emails, the bank transfers, the covert calls between Dean and Celeste. Each file was a new scar, but also a new weapon. I was arming myself, not with rage, but with cold, calculated patience. I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about power, about finally claiming control over a life I'd almost let slip away in whispered lies and broken promises. I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Grace, who'd been a friend for decades. "We're going to make this public," I told her. "Not just to get back what's mine, but to protect anyone else they might try this on." Grace nodded, the glint of steel in her eyes reassuring me. For the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm, and I was ready to be the one who brought the thunder. One quiet afternoon, I received a message from an unexpected source, a former acquaintance of Dean's, someone who had witnessed his charm from behind the mask. She wanted to meet. We sat at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, the smell of salt and coffee weaving around our conversation like a secret. She spoke cautiously at first, then her words spilled out like confessions from a guilty soul. Dean and Celeste weren't just lovers. They were conspirators, weaving a web to ensnare women like me. She told me about other towns, other weddings, other broken hearts left in their wake. She whispered of threats, cover-ups, and manipulations. Each detail was another thread in the tapestry of deceit. Listening, I felt a dark satisfaction. This was bigger than a broken engagement. It was a pattern of calculated cruelty. But with every whispered secret, my resolve hardened. I was no longer the lonely widow or the betrayed bride. I was a woman preparing to untangle the lies and reveal the truth, no matter the cost. Dean's charm had always been his greatest weapon, a smile that made you forget your doubts, a laugh that felt like warmth on a cold day. But I had seen past it now, through the veil of deceit. One evening, I sat alone in my cottage, rereading messages Dean had sent me over the months, sweet nothings layered with subtle manipulation. Each word a carefully crafted lie designed to disarm me, to bind me tighter. I realized how easy it had been for them to use the guise of love as a mask for their plan. Celeste, with her flawless grace, and Dean, with his practiced tenderness, were the perfect con artists. But I was done being their mark. I knew their next moves. I could feel the tide turning, the scales balancing. The world would soon see the truth behind the smiles. And when that day came, no amount of charm or lies would save them. The days after the reception felt like walking through a fog, each step uncertain but necessary. I kept myself busy, sorting through stacks of documents and printed emails, piecing together a timeline of deceit that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. The evidence was damning: bank statements showing suspicious transfers, cryptic messages between Dean and Celeste, and even receipts from hotels in other states. It was a web, and I was the spider weaving it tighter around them. But the most painful discovery wasn't financial, it was how long this had been going on. Years before Dean and I met, and even before my late husband's death, Celeste had been whispering lies and breaking hearts. I thought of the late nights when I found my husband distant, distracted, and the secretive calls he never returned. It all pointed back to Celeste. I pictured her, young and cunning, weaving her way through lives, leaving ruin behind. Anger flared, sharp and cold, but beneath it was a deeper resolve. This wasn't just about exposing their crime, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and protecting others from the same fate. I called my lawyer, Grace, and together we drafted letters to the banks, the police, and even the media. The plan was to go public, not with rage, but with undeniable truth. I wanted the story told my way, from a place of strength and clarity, not bitterness. At night, I sometimes caught myself staring out the window, the Atlantic dark and endless, wondering how someone I trusted so deeply could betray me so completely. But I also knew that no matter how deep the betrayal, the dawn always comes. And I was ready to rise with it. The quiet before the storm is often the most deceptive. After the reception, as the guests dispersed and whispers faded into the night, I found myself alone with the weight of my discoveries pressing down like the main fog rolling off the ocean. The walls of my cottage, once a sanctuary, now felt like silent witnesses to years of deception. I sat by the window, the waves crashing relentlessly below, and traced my fingers over the folder thick with proof, the damning evidence I had collected piece by piece. Each document was a scar, each email a stab, each photograph a reminder of the life I had almost lost. I thought about Dean, the man who had promised me love and a fresh start. The man whose smile had once made my heart flutter with hope. How easily that smile had masked the betrayal beneath. And Celeste, my aunt, my once trusted confidant, whose laughter now echoed like a cruel joke in my ears. How many times had she worn the mask of family while weaving her web of lies? How many nights had she whispered secrets to Dean, plotting to steal what was mine? But there was something darker still, lurking beneath the surface. As I delved deeper into the past, I uncovered whispers of another woman, a ghost from their previous schemes. A woman who had trusted them, only to be shattered by their greed and deceit. I found her blog, a hidden sanctuary of pain and warning. Her words were haunting: they charm you with love, then strip you of everything you hold dear. Beware the smiles that hide knives. Her story ended too soon, a tragedy whispered but never fully told. I realized then that my fight was not just personal, it was a battle against a pattern of cruelty that had destroyed lives long before me. This revelation steeled my resolve. I would not be their next victim. I would be their reckoning. I contacted Grace, my lawyer, and together we began crafting a plan to bring their crimes to light. We reached out to financial institutions, prepared affidavits, and lined up trusted journalists willing to tell the story with care and truth. But even as the plan took shape, a shadow of doubt crept in. Could I really expose them? Could I confront my aunt, the woman who had been like a mother to me at times? The thought was bitter, but necessary. One evening, as I sat reviewing the evidence, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: be careful who you trust. Not everyone wants the truth to come out. My heart raced. Threats were no surprise, but they stung nonetheless. Still, fear would not silence me. I spent sleepless nights preparing, turning over every detail, rehearsing what I would say when the world was watching. I knew the road ahead would be hard, filled with pain and loss, but also with a fierce hope. The dawn was coming, and with it, justice. As the first light of morning spilled across the Atlantic, I made a silent vow, to myself and to every woman who had been betrayed before me, that I would stand tall and fight. Because some wounds can be healed only when the truth is finally told. Days stretched into weeks as I prepared to confront the ghosts that had haunted me for so long. Each morning I awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, but also with the weight of what was to come. The betrayal of Dean and Celeste was not simply about stolen money or broken promises, it was about trust shattered and family fractured beyond repair. I had never imagined I would stand against my own blood, but life is cruel in the lessons it teaches. I spent countless hours at my desk, surrounded by folders, legal papers, and the flicker of candlelight when the nights grew too dark to face the computer screen alone. Grace was my anchor, her steady voice guiding me through the legal labyrinth that awaited. Together, we crafted statements that would cut through the lies and manipulate the narrative, ensuring that the truth would be seen and heard loud and clear. One afternoon, as I walked along the rocky shore, the wind tugging at my hair and the sea spray stinging my cheeks, I thought about the other woman, the one whose life had been undone by their schemes. I had reached out to her family, hoping to gather more information, to weave her story into my own, so her voice would no longer be silenced. Their gratitude was quiet but profound, a reminder that this fight was bigger than me. But with the light came shadows. Dean and Celeste were not idle. I noticed strange cars parked near my cottage, unfamiliar faces watching from a distance. Phone calls with silence on the other end. A sudden power outage that lasted long enough to rattle nerves. The message was clear: they would not give up without a fight. Despite the fear, I found strength in my solitude. I called old friends, women who had known me before the years carved lines in my face and taught me resilience. Their encouragement was a balm, reminding me that I was not alone, that I had a tribe behind me ready to stand when I fell. One evening, as I prepared documents for the press, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. A voice, cold and low, whispered, "You think you've won, Natalie? This is far from over." The line went dead. I sat back, heart pounding, but I refused to let fear dictate my path. Instead, I lit a candle, opened the folder again, and vowed that when the time came, I would stand in the light and speak my truth, no matter the cost. The storm was gathering, but so was my resolve. The days before the final confrontation felt like walking a tightrope stretched thin over a vast abyss. Every phone call, every glance from a passing stranger, tightened the noose of tension wrapped around my chest. I was no longer just a bride betrayed, I was a woman preparing to dismantle the life that had been built on lies, betrayal, and greed. The truth was my sword, and every moment brought me closer to the moment I would wield it. Celeste, ever the graceful actress, tried to maintain her facade in public. At the local market, she smiled and greeted neighbors with practiced warmth, her laughter ringing too loud, too rehearsed. But those who looked closer saw the cracks, an edge of bitterness in her eyes, a nervous flicker when I passed by. Dean, meanwhile, retreated into silence. The charming man who once wooed me with poems and promises now avoided my gaze, his usual confidence shattered like fragile glass. One afternoon, as I reviewed the final draft of my statement, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Celeste standing there, her face carefully composed but her eyes betraying a flicker of desperation. "Natalie," she began, her voice smooth but brittle, "this doesn't have to end this way. We can find a way, together." I looked at her, the woman who had been my confidant, my betrayer, my enemy. "There is no together anymore," I replied softly. "You made your choice. Now you must live with it." That day marked a turning point. The mask Celeste wore so well began to slip. I noticed how she flinched at every phone call, how her smiles faltered when no one was watching. Dean grew more withdrawn, haunted by the inevitability of the reckoning we were about to bring. The quiet calm before the storm was shattered by the weight of what was to come. As I prepared to step into the spotlight and reveal everything, I found strength in the knowledge that I was not alone. The truth had a voice, and it was louder than any lie. No longer a victim, I was a woman reborn, scarred but unbroken, ready to take back what was mine and reclaim my story on my own terms. The days leading up to the public reveal were heavy with quiet intensity. Every morning, I woke with a steady heartbeat and a mind sharpened by purpose. I practiced my speech, rehearsed my words, and reminded myself that this was more than a personal reckoning, it was a declaration of survival. I wasn't just exposing Dean and Celeste's lies, I was reclaiming my dignity, my strength, and my future. At times, I felt the weight of loneliness pressing down. Old fears crept back, of being abandoned, of being betrayed again. But those fears were fleeting, drowned out by the fire that burned inside me. I found solace in the sound of the ocean outside my window, its relentless rhythm a reminder that life moves forward, no matter the storms. I reached out to friends and family who had stood by me through the years, their quiet support a balm to my soul. Grace, my lawyer, was tireless, preparing every document and briefing me on the legal battlefield ahead. Together, we plotted each move carefully, knowing that one misstep could give Dean and Celeste the advantage. At night, when the house was still and the world was quiet, I'd sit by the window, the moonlight casting silver shadows across my face. I thought about the past, the love I thought I had, the betrayal that shattered it, and the path that had led me here. And in those moments, I understood that this wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming my life on my own terms, with courage and grace. The storm was coming. But I was ready. The night before everything was set to be revealed, I barely slept. The cottage was quiet except for the steady pulse of the ocean against the rocks below, a rhythm both calming and relentless. I paced the rooms, touching the photographs, the folders of evidence, the dress I had packed away. This house, which had once held only memories of love and loss, now carried the weight of truth and impending justice. I thought about Dean's smile, once so warm and familiar, now a mask worn thin by lies. And Celeste, whose laughter once comforted me, had become the cruel echo in my heart. How strange it was, to carry such a heavy grief wrapped in the guise of family. I sat by the window and wrote one last note, a letter addressed not just to them, but to myself. A reminder that no matter what happened tomorrow, I had survived. That I was more than their schemes, more than the betrayal I had endured. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised pinks and golds, I felt a fierce calm settle over me. The moment of reckoning was near. I was ready. The morning of the reveal was crisp and clear, the kind of day that feels like a promise. I dressed simply, not the gown I had planned to wear, but a sharp black dress, a symbol of mourning and strength. As I looked in the mirror, I saw not a betrayed woman, but someone ready to reclaim her story, to take back control of her life. The guests gathered once more in the same tent where the lies had been spoken and the vows exchanged. Dean and Celeste arrived, faces pale and eyes darting, unsure of what was coming. I stood at the front, clutching the folder of evidence like a shield and a sword. When I began to speak, my voice was steady and clear. I walked through the betrayal, the lies, the stolen money, and the long history of deception between them. The room fell silent, every word landing with weight and certainty. I watched as the smiles faded from their faces, replaced by shock and anger. At the end, I left the folder on the table, a silent testament to the truth I was no longer willing to hide. I looked at Dean and Celeste and said, "This is the legacy you wanted. It's time the world saw it too." As I stepped away, the murmurs began, the judgment settling like dust. I felt lighter than I had in years, free from the shadows that had held me captive. The wedding was over, but my life, my true life, was just beginning. The silence after my reveal was thick and suffocating, like the calm before a storm's final roar. Guests shifted uneasily, eyes darting between Dean, Celeste, and me. Some whispered, others stared in disbelief. The man I once trusted sat frozen, his charming mask shattered and forgotten, while my aunt's face twisted into a mixture of fury and shame. I felt a strange calm settle over me as the crowd slowly dispersed. Some friends came forward to offer quiet words of support, others simply looked away, unwilling to be caught in the wreckage of a family torn apart. I realized then that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. But I had done what I came to do, I had told my truth. Dean and Celeste left soon after, their departure marked not by goodbyes, but by the heavy weight of consequences now unavoidable. I returned to my cottage, the ocean's steady song greeting me like a long-lost friend. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and let myself breathe. For the first time in a long time I felt free. The past still haunted me, but the future, my future, was finally mine to shape. The days that followed were quieter, as if the world needed time to adjust to the new reality I had forged. The gossip faded, replaced by a gentle silence that allowed space for healing. I focused on myself, on rebuilding the fragments of trust and love that had been shattered. Friends became my anchors, their kindness a balm to wounds both visible and hidden. I spent mornings walking along the rugged coastline, the salt air cleansing my spirit, reminding me that even the roughest storms eventually give way to calm seas. At night, I would sit by the fire with a book in my lap, the flickering flames mirroring the fragile hope growing inside me. I realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting or excusing, it was about freeing myself from the chains of bitterness. I wrote letters, not to Dean or Celeste, but to myself. Words of strength, of resilience, of self-love. I promised to never again allow anyone to dim my light or question my worth. This was not the end, but a new beginning, a chapter of healing, growth, and quiet power. The last embers of that dark chapter flickered and faded, leaving behind the warm glow of a life reclaimed. I stood on the porch of my cottage one crisp morning, the Atlantic breeze ruffling my silver hair, and breathed deeply. The wounds still throbbed beneath the surface, but they no longer defined me. Dean and Celeste were gone, faces of a betrayal exposed and dismantled by truth. Justice had its way, slow and sure, and I was finally free. Yet freedom wasn't a grand spectacle, it was a quiet choice I made every day to rise, to heal, and to live fully again. I had learned that love, true love, was not in the hands of those who break hearts but in the courage to stand up, speak out, and forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness was a gift I gave myself, a balm that soothed the scars and allowed me to dream again. As the sun spilled gold across the ocean, I smiled, soft, knowing, and strong. My story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about resilience, about reclaiming power in the face of darkness, and about the unbreakable spirit that lives within every woman who dares to love and live on her own terms. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe my channel. And I'd love to know, where are you from? Until next time, remember, no matter how deep the night, dawn will always come.